While we were engaged, my wife Julie invited me to stay with her and her family in this cabin they owned in northwest Austin. At first I was wary because I never got along with her family, but after a lot of convincing, I decided it'd be good to spend some time with my future in-laws. On the day we were supposed to go to the cabin, Julie got booked for a TV show and would have to stay until late, so she suggested that I drive her sister Sam, who lived on the way to the cabin. I had never really talked to her that much, but I figured she was nice enough and it'd be rude to say no, so I agreed. After packing my stuff up, I threw it in the back seat and set off on the 30-minute drive to Sam's house at about 7 p.m. The route was mostly through country roads with no lights other than the ones in the houses. But as I drove, I started to see weird lights coming from behind the road. At first, I thought they were headlights, but they were too dim, and every so often I'd look back and they were gone. As someone who listens to way too much true crime and paranormal activity podcasts, I started to get freaked out. Then my radio went out. Not just the satellite, but my CD player, and then my Bluetooth. I was stuck listening to static for 15 minutes in the otherwise eerie, quiet country before I finally reached Sam's house. Right when Sam entered the car, my radio came back. I told her what had been happening on the ride here, and she assured me it was fine, and I was probably just spooked from being alone on the highway, which I decided to believe. As we left her apartment, I felt the biggest sense of dread I have ever felt in my life come out of nowhere. I don't know how to describe it, other than there was something telling me not to drive away from her apartment. But I shoved it down and got on the highway. While driving, we talked a little. I didn't know her that well, so it was all small talk. But at some point, we got to the subject of pets. She told me her dog had recently died. He had been hit by a car. She was gone when it happened, but when she got back home, she found him on the side of the road. His eyes were open, along with his mouth. He had maggots crawling out of his ears. His legs were broken and the bones sticking out. When she finally finished describing his body, the radio cut out again. And in the front of the car, we saw a man standing there facing the other direction. I laid on the horn to warn him as I was going too fast to stop, but he stayed there, not even looking at us. And I hit him. I rushed out to the car to check on him, but when I got to the back, there was nothing. Nothing there. No man, no blood, nothing. I stared out for a second, confused, then got back to the car. I said something to Sam about it, and she didn't really seem that disturbed by it. She said it was probably just some animal that ran away, but that didn't seem right. As we drove further down the road, the static on the radio kept getting worse. Through the static, I thought I heard something, like a voice. Sam tried to turn down the radio, but I batted her hand away and turned it right up. There, clear as day, I heard a woman say, "Roadkill." I looked over to Sam, who was staring straight at me, eyes dead and emotionless. I couldn't get away. And with all this, I had a sudden, unignorable urge to stop the car and look in the trunk. So I did. When I opened the trunk, I saw Sam, dead, and a caricature of what I imagined her dog looked like after being killed. There were maggots crawling out of her ears. Her legs were broken so badly the bones were sticking out from her skin, and her eyes were wide open, staring at me. What was in my car? I cautiously walked to the front and found it empty. Sam, or whatever looked like Sam, was gone. I got in the car and slammed on the gas. The whole rest of the drive, static filled the car. First, the backstory for context. At the time of my paranormal experience, the neighborhood that our house was in was not the safest. It was a very low-income neighborhood in the heart of a large metropolitan city in the early stages of development. When we moved in, 3 of the 5 houses bordering our property were full-on drug houses. In the neighborhood at that time, it was best to keep to yourself, mind your own business, and not bring any attention. Our immediate next door neighbors had constant traffic in and out of their house, and it was very obvious what was going on. We always minded our business, but I tried to stay cordial and say hi whenever my neighbor was outside. He was always polite to me, but we had very limited interaction. Sometimes, some of the neighbor's customers would make me very uncomfortable by watching me and saying derogatory things if I was outside. I would just ignore them and go quickly inside, but these interactions made me very uncomfortable, and I didn't feel safe if I was home alone without my husband. 2 weeks after the paranormal experience that I'm about to share, we woke up in the middle of the night to a lot of commotion, and when I looked outside our bedroom window, I saw cops raiding our neighbor's house. I found out later from news reports that the owners were charged with distributing a lot of drugs. They also had a large stock of illegal firearms, a significant amount of cash, and one of the individuals living there was on the run, wanted on murder and robbery charges, but he was also hiding out in this house during the paranormal incident that I'm about to describe. Now, to the paranormal part. It was late one night after midnight, and my husband and dog were asleep in our bedroom. I was in the kitchen bent over the trash can to take out the bag, and then take out our recycling bin on the side of the house so the trash did not stink up the kitchen overnight. To get to the bin outside, I just walked out the front door and to the side of the house due to the way our property is set up. When I was bent over to the trash can getting ready to pull out the bag, I felt what I thought was my husband walk up right behind me and lean over like he was about to hug me. I giggle and bend down further to dodge him and turn around quickly as I say, "I hug you first." And just as I turn around to go grab him around the waist to give him a bear hug, I saw a woman standing in the middle of the kitchen about 4 feet away from me. She instantly put her arms out towards me with her palms open, and she floated/glided quickly towards me while she mouthed, "No." As soon as she got inches from me, she literally vanished into thin air. In one instant, she was gliding so quickly towards me, and in the next, she just disappeared. I did not hear anything, but her face had an expression of panic, and even though I did not hear her yell it, her mouth screamed no. This happened so fast, in a span of 2 to 3 seconds. The only details about her appearance I could recall were she was completely solid, not transparent or translucent. She was wearing a long black sleeve dress with a white and double-layered collar. The cuffs on her sleeve were slightly belled, and there were little white buttons going down the entire length of the front of her dress. She was about my height. Her eyes were strikingly light blue. She had long, very thick, tightly curly, and very unruly jet black hair. She had pale skin and was floating a few feet above the air. It happened so quickly, and those were the only details I could immediately remember. I was in shock and disbelief. Immediately after she vanished, I stood still for maybe 1 to 2 seconds, and I bolted past where she was just a few seconds ago before and ran into my bedroom screaming for my husband to wake up. He instantly jumped out of bed and grabbed me, asked what's wrong. I started crying, and all I could manage to sputter was, "Someone is in our house." Before I could explain it further, he grabbed his pistol from the nightstand and ran out of the bedroom to find the intruder. Our dog, a 90-pound pit bull, was in our bedroom at the time, also woke up and immediately started growling and barking at the entrance of our bedroom. He got in between me and the bedroom door frame and was barking and growling increasingly. I heard my husband calling for the dog to back up, and the dog refused to go to my husband, which is very out of character. My husband came back to our bedroom and said he didn't find anyone and that all the doors and windows are locked and there was no sign of a break-in. I told him he wouldn't find anything or anyone because it wasn't a person, but a spirit. At this point, my skeptical husband rolled his eyes and started berating me for waking him up with stupid ghost stories. But then, when he saw that I was so legitimately scared and shaken up, he sat down and asked me to explain what happened. After I told him the story, he just chalked it up to me hallucinating due to stress from work and insomnia, and held me until I finally fell asleep. The next day, I FaceTimed my mom and told her about what happened, because I knew she would believe me because she grew up in a haunted house and had seen apparitions before. I just needed someone to talk to and tell me I wasn't crazy or hallucinating. When I described what the woman looked like, she fell silent and had a look of shock on her face. She told me that woman that I described was my great-grandmother Gabriella, who my mother was extremely close to. She died before I was born. I have never seen a picture of her because the only photos that the family had of her were in a box that was lost in the 50s during my grandparents' move to the States. However, my mother said that my grandmother still had my great-grandmother's dress that she made herself and wore almost every day. The next weekend, I took a trip a state away to see my grandmother with my mother, and I told her what happened. We spent the day in the attic looking for the dress. My mother had found it in a suitcase, and when she pulled it out, I was in disbelief. It was the same dress that the woman I saw was wearing. Long black dress with slightly flared belled sleeves, small white buttons along the length of the front of the dress, and an unmistakable double-layered white collar with those edges. After discussing everything with my mother and grandmother, we all believed that on that night, my great-grandmother Gabriella stopped me from taking out the trash to protect me from whoever was outside. It was the only thing I could think of, especially considering the constant crime and questionable people that were always present outside my front door, so close to me. I truly believe that if I had taken the trash out that night, I may have seen something that I shouldn't have, or been assaulted by one of the neighbor's customers that would have threatened and sexually harassed me. Luckily for us, after the drug raid, the neighbor's house was foreclosed. A developer bought the house and tore it down to build a new home. The neighborhood since has done a 180 and has been cleaned up, and our property has increased in tenfold since this happened 4 years ago. It's a generally safe neighborhood now, but after that experience, I will never walk out my front door by myself in the middle of the night ever again.